Hello, I'm Sitkin. I'm a professor of management and public policy at the Fuqua School and at the Sanford School at Duke University. I'm also the Michael Krzyzewski Distinguished Professor of Leadership at Duke. Today, I'd like to talk with you about the value of pursuing ambitious goals. But even more importantly, for the entrepreneur who wants to really stretch, when do you pursue ambitious goals? When do you cut back a little bit and pursue goals that may not be quite so ambitious? There are criteria that our research suggests can help you answer that kind of question. Specifically, entrepreneurship always involves some risk. The key is, can you be smarter about it? Entrepreneurship, by definition, involves doing new things, trying new ways of pursuing it, taking risks and stepping away from the safety, whether you're in a large organization or you're starting something, breaking off from something that's already going on. Taking that risk is at the heart of entrepreneurship. When you do something you care about that makes it important enough to be worth the risk, how do you know when it's good to take a big risk versus a smaller risk? Are the risks you're taking calculated? Can you distinguish when to go big, when to go home, and when to stay and fight but small? This is really important for entrepreneurs to know how to be smart about pursuing moonshots or pursuing more incremental kind of goals that they might be striving for. Now, the first part of the research that we've been focusing on is the pursuit of stretch goals. Now, stretch goals, we've had articles in Harvard Business Review, in Google's blog online, in a variety of academic articles, and we use the definition of stretch goals as being a goal that has an objective probability of attainment that is unknown but seems impossible given the current capabilities of the organization or the individual. In other words, your current practices, your current skill level and experience and knowledge doesn't give you enough of an answer to even estimate how probable it is to attain the goal, because given where you are, it actually could be impossible. So the two key features of stretch goals are, one, they're extremely difficult. The second feature is they're extremely novel. It's that combination that goes beyond the really well-established type of goal, which is called a challenging goal. The research has shown that is pretty universally a positive. Stretch goals have a funny kind of reputation. Some people think they're the gift to the world, and other people think they're really terrible. So this bimodal distribution of how people assess the value of stretch goals has led us in our research to try to understand better when are they good and when are they not. And it led us to conclude, and I'll come back to this in a few minutes, what we call the paradox of stretch goals. What causes people to pursue stretch goals or to avoid them has to do with two factors. One is recent performance. Have you done really well recently, or you've had some big failures and you're trying to overcome them, on one hand, and on the other hand, how much resource do you have available? Do you have any slack resources, or is everything you've got tied up in your current operations? The bottom line is usually stretch goals are a bad idea, but sometimes they're a great thing to pursue, and we need to have the right organizations and individuals to pursue them. But they also need to know that there are options. You don't have to just go for a stretch goal or stay with the status quo. There are options in between that you can pursue, and it's important to have a more nuanced understanding of this when you're starting a new venture especially, and when you face the kind of challenges that entrepreneurs inevitably face. Now, what kind of stretch goals are there, and when are they right for you? The first question is, if you've been very successful in the recent past and you have available uncommitted resources, or you can acquire them, you're a perfect candidate for stretch goals. Companies that have deep pockets, they've just raised a ton of money, and they've been very successful. They're on a positive roll. They are really good candidates to pursue stretch goals. Stretch goals are still difficult to achieve, but those kinds of organizations have the resilience, have the deeper pockets that they can hit the bumps that you're inevitably going to face with a stretch goal. You're not going to get it in one leap. You're going to have successes and failures and successes and failures. But the organizations that are on a positive roll and have resources available to them can overcome the rough waters and get to the success with a stretch goal. Or if it turns out not to work, they can survive that, learn from it, and move on to the next thing. If you are very successful, but you don't have uncommitted resources, what you need to do is you're confident, but you have real constraints. What you need to do is pursue a strategy that my colleague Carl Weick called small wins, which is you're looking for not the big hit, but you're looking for incremental successes. You're chipping away at the things you already know how to do. Usually, as a result of that, you're able to actually build up some resources, which puts you in a better position than if you want to shoot for that moonshot. But in the meantime, you're racking up some of these small wins and you're learning more about the terrain. Now, suppose lately you've been unsuccessful. Then the question is, when I haven't been so successful of late, how do the resources available to me influence what I should do? You should not go for stretch goals if you've been unsuccessful. What you should do is if you've been unsuccessful, but you do have resources available, you're very capable, but you're in a situation where you're kind of discouraged. What you need to do is experiment with various ways of trying the pieces of what composes the stretch goal. And it's a strategy which in some of my earlier research, we called the strategy of small losses. Essentially what you're doing is you're experimenting. You're trying different things and you're figuring out how I can learn about the pieces of this stretch goal and which ones can work and which ones can't. But in the meantime, you're doing these modestly risky experiments. You're building a track record because when you lose, when you fail, it's under the radar. People don't notice. But you've gained experience and you have the resources to devote to that. You're laying the groundwork for future success. When you've been unsuccessful, the fourth option, but you don't have resources, you've got to go back to what I mentioned before, the small wins strategy. You've got to dig yourself out of the hole. You want to do things that are small enough that people aren't going to be looking at every little thing you do. They're not big enough that you're going to be able to do them, and you don't need a lot of resources. So the idea is if you're in a strong, successful position, it's worth trying the stretch goal. When you're in a very weak and low-resourced position, you want to try to experiment a little bit till you can figure out where you should go next. When you don't have resources, you've got to build those resources up by being conservative and building up those small wins. Now, I'll come back in a minute to the idea of the paradox of stretch goals. Actually, let me talk about that for a moment now. The paradox of stretch goals is one of the most interesting things I think we found in our research on stretch goals. And the paradox of stretch goals is that those who should pursue stretch goals don't, and those who shouldn't pursue stretch goals do. Those who don't, but should, are the ones who are successful and wealthy, well-resourced, and you say, well, they can go for that moonshot. They're in a great position. And we can think of examples of companies that have done that, who are taking big risks. They're very successful. They have a lot of money to throw at problems, and they go for big gains. But those are the exception. What typically happens when you are in that successful, well-resourced position is what you do is you become conservative. The response is kind of, what do I need a stretch goal for? I'm already successful. I already have a lot of resources. I'm doing just fine, thank you. Let me just keep going with what I've done. But those are the organizations and the individuals that we as a society need to take those big risks. So if you're in an entrepreneurial venture, that has built up some positive momentum and has good resources, that's actually a good time to try for those stretch goals, even though you may be encouraged to play it safe and continue on a safe trajectory by funders, by others involved. Those who have been failing, those who don't have resources, they tend to go for the stretch goal. The phrases that we have are go for broke or a Hail Mary pass. They are trying to overcome the shame and embarrassment of failure. And so they say, let's go for something big, but they're not in the right position to do it. So if you're in an entrepreneurial venture and you have few resources, or you haven't yet hit that stride of a successful track record that you can build on, don't go for the stretch goal. Go for either the small wins to build up the resources or the small losses where you can gain the experience and really measure out the terrain in order to keep going positively and wait until you have the chance for that big leap forward. So the research on stretch goals helps us really understand how to think of going for really ambitious goals, when to do it, when not to do it. Now, there's another stream of research that we're involved with that is relevant here as well. And recently, with some colleagues, I've been looking at the question of courage. And in particular, a former postdoc who's now on the faculty of the University of Limerick and I have been looking at what we call everyday or ordinary courage. Her name is Moran Anisman Raisin. We've defined courage, along with one of our other colleagues, Ronit Kark, as the pursuit of meaningful outcomes under conditions of perceived risks to the actor. So think about going for a stretch goal, or you're really taking a personal risk in your organization, but you're doing it because it's meaningful to you. You really care about the outcome. You care what you're trying to do. Now, when we think of courage, typically what our research has shown is we immediately think of heroic courage. When we ask people to identify times they've been courageous or others have been courageous, and we use the word courage, what we get is almost completely examples of heroism. You know, running out and risking your life in a battlefield, or being a whistleblower because of some moral failing on the part of the organization. Everybody thinks of heroic courage when they hear the word courage. But when we give people our definition of everyday courage, something meaningful where you had some risk involved, and you were willing to take that risk for that thing that was meaningful, what we get is overwhelming examples of everyday or ordinary courage. Most of the research mirrors what most of us would react to. The research focuses on heroic courage. Almost all of the research in management and organizational research focuses on moral courage. Whistleblowers, standing up to your boss when you think they're doing something wrong. Or there's another line of research comes out of the military research tradition, which is physical courage, the example I used of running onto the battlefield. In our research, however, we found that there was a much broader array of types of courage, and that they were all relevant, some more relevant than others, but they were all quite relevant to entrepreneurship. What's also interesting is when you distinguish the risks that are involved, only 16% of the risks were physical risks, even though that's what the research focused on. And only 23% focused on moral issues, which is what most of the research focused on. The two biggest categories that people noted where courage was involved were taking strategic risks, definitely relevant to entrepreneurship, and pursuing goal achievement, and really ambitious goal achievement as well. 53%, over half, noted that goal achievement was involved, and 43% noted that strategic risks were involved. So you're looking at 2 to 3 times more than what most of the research has been focusing on. Now, there are other types of risks involved in courage as well. There can be relational risks. That can be true in entrepreneurial circumstances, reputational risks for sure, and even emotional risks. Taking on an entrepreneurial venture, especially if that's not been your history, it can be a very risky, emotional kind of undertaking. In terms of the motivation for why would one be courageous, I mentioned morality and I mentioned goal achievement, but others that come up quite frequently are benevolence, doing things for other people. Some entrepreneurial ventures are not being done because it's going to be financially valuable, but rather they're being done because you're trying to help a group of people as well. Other reasons that people act courageously is to build a sense of belonging to a group that they care about, or to be authentic to who you really are. Are you really creative? Do you want to break new ground and you're being boxed in the environment you're already in? It takes some courage sometimes to step out of that and say, that's not really me. Now, courage to pursue stretch goals has some nuances to it. And some of our research, we distinguished what we called the courage to say yes from the courage to say no. Entrepreneurship involves risk, so you've got to have the courage to say yes. But you've got to be smart about it, which means you need to have the courage to say no as well. You need to know when to pursue moonshots in a courageous way and know when to avoid them. And many times it will take courage not only to step up and try something really risky and ambitious, but when you're being encouraged by those around you to step into this void and try to do something risky, if you've now done that careful assessment and you've said, you know, we really don't have the deep pockets, we don't have the resources to go for a stretch goal. You know, we haven't been on a roll of successes lately. Why don't we build some successes and then we can go for that moonshot? You may have to say no to those around you, and that takes courage too. Knowing that there are strategic options, that you have the small wins option, the small losses option, you don't have to go for broke or shoot for the moon. You can have other options. And knowing your personal history of courageous action and having the confidence to apply it. Are you someone who loves to say yes to stepping into a courageous situation? Maybe you need to help step back a little bit, get others around you who can get you to have the courage to say no. If you're more risk averse, maybe you somehow found yourself in an entrepreneurial venture and didn't realize quite how risky it was. You may need others to help you have the courage to say yes if your circumstances merit it. The bottom line is, in today's world, it's important for entrepreneurs to understand which kinds of goals to pursue. When should you stretch? When should you experiment? When should you go for safer small wins and have the right goals while you're still building to this ambitious target? And when should you say no to pursuing that which is more difficult and more risky? Having courage and understanding your own courage, recognizing your history of being courageous, both in saying yes and in saying no, is an essential element for successful entrepreneurship.